So sort of continuing this thread that we started on the previous slide, um, we're going to talk here and really bring home some concrete examples of why there's this, great natural relationship between linked data and the semantic web, and describing resources in the bibliographic world, which is sort of our territory as library scientists. So linked data is the premise of the semantic web. We also saw that linked data comes into play with XML through the use of namespaces. But if we want to map this to the semantic web as we were talking about it in the previous session, let's just take a look at how this would break down. If bibliographic resources or people and organizations and concepts, if all of those things could be defined as classes in ontologies, and then bibliographic relationships could be defined as properties in ontologies. If those two things could happen, then anyone can add bibliographic resources to the semantic web and define any kinds of relationships among existing resources. But linking their statements with existing ontologies is key. Just like we were talking about with authority control, and saying that, it's important that everybody get on the same page, that they're definitely talking about the same Mark Twain. That's what authority control is good for. And semantic web ontologies are just a modern day, high-tech computer science version of authority control. But it can go like this great step further because it's an implementation of authority control that's available to anybody. I guess the Library of Congress authorities are available on the open web, so technically they're available to anybody, but we don't see them being used by the general population. But for example, our catch-all example we like to use in library science classes usually is the Harry Potter series, so I'll pull it out again. If we want to sort of see the world of fanfic, which is people who like to write, fiction responses or derivative fiction, there's a bibliographic relationship that derives from the Harry Potter series. People can create fanfic on the web, and then they can link their fanfic in a derivative bibliographic relationship with ontological classes that define different books in the Harry Potter series. And if there's a hierarchical relationship between an individual book in the Harry Potter series and the Harry Potter series as a whole, then the fanfic that gets related to a particular book also gets related to the series as a whole, and vice versa. So to see what I'm talking about here with these second two bullet points, the if and things, let's sort of map these ideas to what we were talking about previously with the Freedmen's Bureau ontology. So I said if bibliographic resources or people and organizations or concepts could be defined as classes and ontologies. Remember that in the Freedmen's Bureau ontology, the classes were the things like we opened the ontology with some general classes, like we had thing, and we had an agent, and an agent could be a person or an organization. And then we had a document, and a document could be a letter, and a letter could either be a circular or a warning or a response or a memo. So we were creating these classes and saying that these are the things that we're dealing with when we're describing the paperwork that came from the Freedmen's Bureau as a government agency. And then the back on the slide says that bibliographic relationships could be defined as properties and ontologies. So properties would be things like, we said that there was an object property. I'm looking right now at page 5 of the Freedmen's Bureau ontology that you got in class if you want to read along. So there's an object property called sender that defines a relationship between a letter and a person. That's just a relationship. There's a relationship called called recipient that exists between a letter and a person. There's a relationship called owned by that exists between an agent and a thing, or a thing and an agent. A thing is owned by an agent. So you can define any kind of relationship you want. So those bibliographic relationships that we saw a few slides ago could also be they could also be described as object properties and semantic web ontologies, and then any kinds of bibliographic works could be affiliated in any kind of bibliographic relationship that anyone could conceive of and encode in an ontology. So the richness of description gets so much better than what you typically get in sort of flat, minimally interrelated catalog records in a library catalog. And guess what? This sort of rich description of bibliographic records and bringing the concepts of linked data and the semantic web to the world of library science is exactly what Ferber is all about. So you read about Ferber in your readings for this session. Ferber stands for Functional Requirements for Bibliographic Records. It's not a metadata standard, it's not a metadata schema, it's not a vocabulary, it's not an authority file, it's not even like a procedural document. It's really a conceptual system. It's a way to understand entities and relationships in the bibliographic universe. And it's really taken a strong foothold in the library science community, as we'll see later on with RDA. So the Ferber conceptual model sort of starts out, softly, easing us in and reminding us that there are certain tasks that users partake in their quest to fulfill their information needs. And those tasks can include finding things that meet their search criteria, identifying resources so that the user can confirm that they found what they sought, and that they can also distinguish similar items and tell what the difference is between them. Another user task is, of course, to select items that meet their requirements, to obtain those items, and then to navigate those items. So those are the user tasks that the people who were coming up with the Ferber model, they said, what are the things that a person needs to be able to do when they're interacting with bibliographic information in an ISAR, in an information system? And they defined these as the main tasks that people need to be able to do in order to meet their information needs while interacting with bibliographic resources. And from that sort of analysis of the user tasks, the people who came up with the Ferber system identified 4 constructs that they would use to express this system. And the 4 constructs are content, which is sort of bibliographic resources, entities, and the types of content that you can have are work, expression, manifestation, and item. The next construct is another entity type called person or corporate bodies. This is something that I often refer to as a legal entity or an agent in that Freedmen's Bureau ontology. Excuse me. And then the third construct is yet a third entity type called subjects. And subjects can be concepts, they can be people or corporate bodies, or they can be works. So any of those 3 categories of things, concepts, people and corporate bodies, or works, can be the subjects of content. And finally, the 4th construct is a set of relationships, and those relationships are called creation, ownership, use, and essence. So creation has to do with who the creators of a resource are, who created the content. Ownership clearly has to do with who owns the content. Use has to do with who uses the content. And then essence has to do with that idea of aboutness that we were talking about back when we were talking about subject cataloging. Excuse me. So essence is also known as aboutness or isness, is-ness. So These are the constructs of the Ferber universe. And then on the next few slides, and also in your Ferber reading, you see how these concepts get drawn out into different relationships. So this is a diagram that was taken straight out of your reading, and it is described pretty well in the reading, so I'll go through it relatively quickly, and then we can talk about it in class or on the discussion boards if any clarification is needed. This is one of these things that sometimes can take a while to get your head around. So the relationships that are possible among Group 1 entities, and again, Group 1 entities are work, expression, manifestation, and item. It says here that a work is realized through an expression is embodied in a manifestation, and a manifestation is exemplified by an item. That thin blue line in the middle of the diagram is also important because it shows us where we're going from, where we're crossing the line between the abstract and the concrete. And so work and expression are both abstract concepts, and then manifestation and items are things. So if we wanted to map this to an example, a work is definitely the most abstract of all of these. A work might be the story of Romeo and Juliet as created in the mind of William Shakespeare. And then an expression of Romeo and Juliet might be a particular adaptation of Shakespeare's script, including his original script of the play, or an adaptation that's been created for a certain production. So in my example, I talk about the Baz Luhrmann production of Romeo and Juliet that was released as a film. I think it was back in the late 90s. It had, I think, Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio. So Baz Luhrmann's interpretation of Romeo and Juliet is an expression of the work that was created by William Shakespeare. And then his Luhrmann's expression as a film is manifested in different formats. So it was manifested in, in actual film canisters that got sent to movie theaters around the country back when it came out in film. It has been manifest as, DVD and in digital formats. So manifestation is sort of talking about the different formats that an expression can come out in. And then an item is a thing that you can pick up, and an item is a subcategory of manifestation. So when you pick up an item, you're picking up a copy of a manifestation. And when you're thinking of a manifestation, you're thinking of the manifestation of a particular expression. And if you're thinking about an expression, then you're thinking about the expression of a particular work. Now, of course, a lot of works only ever have one expression. There are probably more works that only have one expression than there are works that have multiple expressions. But there are definitely tons and tons of works in the bibliographic universe that have multiple expressions, like multiple editions of a book, different translations. So if a work is translated into different languages, each translation is considered a different expression of the original work because it's still in that abstract form, and there's still some intellectual contribution of the person who's deriving the work into an expression. So give yourself some time to think about that, and also to maybe think of some other examples of your own and see if you can map your own examples to the work, expression, manifestation item. I think the more practice you get doing that, the more comfortable these concepts can get. And there's going to be a discussion thread in the message boards that you can contribute to. The only one that you're required to contribute to for this session is the one with the authority control. But this can be a fun one to talk about, so I hope that you will go to the message boards and come up with your own sort of hierarchies that take us from work all the way down to item.